술이 분분할 때 방자 겁을 내어 낙이 물고 나가.
That was part of a Pansori performance of 이별가, or Song of Parting in English, from the classic Chunyanga. And what our listeners might be surprised to learn is that the singer you just heard there is from Germany. Her name is Anna Yates-Lu, and she's currently an assistant professor of ethnomusicology at Seoul National University's Department of Korean Music. She completed her Ph.D. on Pansori, the traditional Korean art form, and she was trained by the renowned singer Min Hye Sung. She also performed Pansori in both Europe and Korea, and she's here with us today in the studio to tell us more about her story and about Pansori. Dr. Yates-Lu, hello and welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Well, first I have to say that was an amazing performance we just heard there. Just chilling, really. Perhaps before we get into your story, can you briefly explain for our listeners who may not know what Pansori is? Can you describe it for us?
So basically an easy way to understand it is it's storytelling through song. So usually you have three elements. You have song, you have narration, you have gesture, which obviously doesn't transmit well via radio. But these three elements come together and they tell classic folk tales in Korea. And these stories can go on for a really long time. I mean, they can be up to 8 hours long.
Wow.
You can also do it more short like I do. I'm not that much of an expert yet. But yeah, it's because you need to tell the story just with your voice. So it goes through very intensive training in order to be able to use your voice's sound effects, to narrate, to keep going for long times with, often very intense vocal passages as well. So, yeah.
Right, so it's a sort of traditional storytelling form of singing. So I'm sure our listeners are very curious. How and when did you first encounter Pansori?
Yeah, so, I mean, my first encounter was actually, I didn't realize this at the time, but it was, I watched Im Kwon-taek's film Chunyang while I was still living in Germany, but did not know what Pansori was. Like, really becoming aware of Pansori was when I was doing my master's in London. I was researching cultural policy, but I had to fill up my my sort of credits weren't quite full enough yet. So I took a course on traditional music of East Asia. And even in class there, hearing about Pansori, I was like, okay, I guess there's this genre. It's not that interesting. But then there was a concert that was happening at the Korean Cultural Centre in London. And tickets were cheap. And so I was like, well, why not? Went along and was blown away. They had the surtitles there for people who didn't speak Korean. I didn't speak Korean very well at that point. I ended up ignoring them because you were missing the performance if you were looking at the surtitles.
Sure.
It was so incredibly expressive. I mean, the scene that I was watching at the time, I still remember, it's basically a battle on a river, two boats chasing after each other, arrows flying and stuff. And you see that. Just listening to the voice, watching this singer wield her fan, you could see all of that happening, even if you didn't understand the language. And I was like, how is this possible? And that got me really curious. And then, one thing just sort of led to another. And then, I decided to change pathways and look at Pansori more seriously. And here I am now.
Right. Well, yes, you've given a very brief description, but it's far more than that. You, as you said, you were studying cultural policy, is basically a sort of international relations politics kind of field, right?
Yeah.
So that's quite a jump to go from there to studying Pansori.
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. I started off for my undergraduate doing anthropology.
Right, okay.
And then I'm still interested in cultural policy, so I wanted to know a bit more about that. But then by coming back to my field, which is ethnomusicology, so it's sometimes described as the anthropology of music. So, you're still looking at culture, but through this lens of music. And so that was the field through which I decided to research Pansori. So in a way, I was kind of doing a U-turn, coming back to where I'd started from, more than anything else.
But did you have history in music? Did you have experience singing or performing like this before?
No. On the one hand, I'm really glad that I didn't have any vocal training because it made it very easy. I didn't have to unlearn anything once I was then in the field. I played violin for 10 years, but nothing that was in any way particularly relevant for then researching Pansori, because it's a completely different musical concept from what maybe people sort of used to Western music might be expecting.
Right, so as you said, it's very different. Even just hearing that short clip, I'm sure our listeners will be thinking it is very different. It must have been quite challenging then still because it was so unfamiliar. How is it different from Western music? I feel like the way you sing, the diction and all these sorts of inflections are so different from Western styles of singing.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the main difference is this sort of the husky vocal tone that's often considered sort of desirable. What actually happens in the process of training, I'm still very early in that process compared to sort of maybe a Korean Pansori singer my age would have been learning at this point for sort of 20, 25 years. So I'm really, really early still in that process. But basically what you're doing through the way you sing, challenging your vocal cords. You know, like if you do muscle building, like bodybuilding, you actually tear your muscle to make it grow bigger.
Right.
You basically do that, but with your throat. So the throat muscles gradually generate scar tissue, and that's what creates that husky sort of vocal tone.
Right.
So obviously any kind of an opera singer or something hearing that will be sort of shuddering, like waking up in a cold sweat just thinking about that. But that's that kind of vocal aesthetic. I mean, obviously you take care not to go too far. You always hear these stories of Pansori singers like spitting blood and stuff. That's one of those like big misconceptions, I think, about Pansori. You should try and avoid that. If you've done that, you've probably gone too far. It's targeted scarring, which still sounds really masochistic, but there you go. That's, I think, one of the main differences.
So you're blown away initially, but what kept you going? What do you think is special about Pansori that kept you drawing you in?
I mean, I think it's really just the gift that keeps on giving. Like, you know, these stories are long. Like that story that I was singing from there, Chunyanga, can be up to 8 hours long. That's a lot of material. And that's just one version of these stories. Just the classical texts alone, you have 5 stories. Each of them have different versions, each version being a sort of minimum of 3 hours in length, up to 8 hours long. That's a lot of material to dig through. And I mean, I'm still learning a lot about that as well. But I think especially now as I'm digging deeper into the content, you know, everyone kind of knows the stories. Like if you're in Korea, you know what the story of Chunyang is.
Sure.
But once you then dig in and then there's these fun little episodes like this sort of the bickering that's going on between the servants of Chunyang and her master, like they have a sort of love-hate relationship going on. Then Chunyang's mother is like regretting her youth when she used to be young and beautiful and the boys were chasing her, but now they're chasing her daughter. And there's these really kind of just human moments, like these really captivating characters as well, which I think the deeper you go in, it's these kind of these themes, these characters, these episodes are just so fascinating to me. And then, yeah, learning it myself, being able to produce some of the sounds, not all of the sounds, and then just appreciating just how amazing the people who really do that are, I think is, yeah, that really keeps drawing me in as well.
Well, you say performing some of the sounds, producing some of the sounds, but you, I believe, entered a Pansori competition in Europe back in 2015, and you even won first prize. It was the K-Vox Festival, I believe, if I've got that right. So you're clearly talented as well.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I had a bit of an unfair advantage in that one because it's a fascinating thing. At this point in France and Belgium, so in the Francophone region, you have this really passionate group of Pansori aficionados that have been, my teacher's been teaching there for more than 10 years. People have been going to her classes for more than 10 years. So like they know stuff, but they only are able to learn from her for like 2 weeks a year. So it builds up. But at that point in time, I just finished years of field work, living just around the corner from my teacher's studio and spending any free moment that I had with her.
Okay.
So I just had so much more exposure, which, I mean, did give me a bit of an advantage. What for me was really striking about that competition was these other people who, you know, only encountered Pansori for maybe 2 weeks of the year, but then spend the rest of the time practicing by themselves.
Wow.
Because they just love it so much. And I was like, wow, you guys are really cool. Like, I had it easy. You guys are amazing. You know, so that, I think, was what was really striking for me for that particular experience there.
Okay, so you say you were quite lucky, but still, I imagine studying Pansori, researching Pansori, it can be quite difficult and challenging, especially when you're overseas and not in Korea. And also, what did those people around you think as well, your family and your friends, especially shifting from a very different field to that now?
I mean, I've been very lucky in that regard that my parents, for example, were always like, just try it out first, see where it leads you. And I think because I've had that support, I've managed to end up in, what is obviously rather a niche subject. Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
I think mostly the people around me have been very supportive, and I've just been so lucky with the people I met that, I had this 1 year of field work where I had very intensive exposure. But then, after I left, those relationships continue. So every time I came back, I mean, now I live here, but in between, I'd be going to Korea once a year. Whenever I went, I'd go to my teacher and she'd still teach me just something, just to kind of keep it going.
Sure.
So I think that's, really lucky on my part.
And then in 2020, you became the assistant professor of ethnomusicology at Seoul National University's Department of Korean Music. In fact, you are the youngest assistant professor that the department ever had, I believe. How did that opportunity come about?
Well, I mean, I wasn't the first foreign professor in that department. Hilary Fincham-Sung is an excellent researcher who had the post before me. When she left, the post opened conveniently at a moment when I was looking for work. So I applied and was lucky enough to get the opportunity.
Still, it sounds like a dream role.
Yes, I mean, it's very difficult for, academia in general to get a job.
Sure.
But even more for such a specified subject. Like if I was getting a job overseas, odds are I'd be, doing Korean culture, literature. Maybe if I'm lucky, I could teach one class on the music. Whereas here I can spend all my time just doing what I'm actually interested in. So I'm so lucky and grateful to be in this position.
And what's it been like over the past 3 years, researching and teaching?
Well, I mean, because I came at, COVID at its peak.
Right,
so
of course, yes.
It took a while for me to actually meet my students in person. Now we're finally back to normal, and obviously that's really nice, sort of being in the same room together. You can just do more, definitely. But I mean, I love it. Like the students, obviously it's SNU, the students are super engaged.
Sure.
I have really enthusiastic colleagues who are really always trying to create the best educational environment. So it's a really stimulating place to be in. And I mean, I know Pansori, there are obviously a lot of other areas of Korean music that I don't know about. And now where I am located, I'm able to learn about those as well, which is really useful for me.
There's a concern sometimes with people when it comes to traditional music, whether it's Pansori or other types of Korean kugak, that perhaps people are losing interest or perhaps it's hard to preserve that history. What have you seen about perhaps with your students and as you studied it, researched it in Korea? Do you think that concern, is it real or is that a valid concern, or do you think there is still plenty of interest, and especially perhaps outside of Korea, as you said, there were people interested who from your experience as well. Is Pansori and Korean traditional music in a healthy place at the moment?
Well, I would say that there is still definitely cause for concern. I do think for many people in Korea at the moment, they don't see the linkage to their normal life. What I do see is that there are lots of people working really hard to create those linkages. And so, I mean, a couple of years back where Inaichi came out with, the song The Tiger Is Coming that went viral, there was a big sort of wave of interest that was spurred on by that, which definitely as a knock-on effect has seen, I think, a lot more people just experimenting with traditional music, sort of pop stars also incorporating elements of that into their music, because it's no longer perceived quite so much as just old and boring, but as sort of a potentially interesting thing that you can use to differentiate yourself also on the world market and so on. But yeah, there's definitely still many people who don't feel comfortable either. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done to allow people to comfortably just encounter Korean traditional music as well, both overseas and here in Korea as well.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but very briefly, what's next for you? Do you have any aims specifically going forward?
Well, I mean, research is always ongoing. I'm doing a lot of research these days looking at the presentation of Korean traditional music in mainstream media. I'm working on creating my own sort of YouTube content, educational content, because most of the things that you see are very basic, but there are a lot of people that do know things. So I'm trying to sort of create stuff for other people there as well. And yeah, just keeping going, singing, learning, developing. Yeah.
Are you looking to help spread Pansori to other countries? Is that what you would like to do? Or is that perhaps even help Korean people understand Pansori better?
I mean, I think the two go hand in hand. If people in Korea don't know Pansori, how can you spread it overseas? Obviously, I mean, I have a role that I can do in terms of translating things, and I help make sure that subtitles and stuff for overseas content is accurate. But yeah, I think if the interest in Korea also is more established, then overseas will follow pretty naturally.
Well, sadly, we're going to have to end it there, but it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on our show today. We've been speaking to Dr. Anna Yates-Lu, Assistant Professor at Seoul National University's Department of Korean Music. Thank you once again for your time today.
Well, thank you very much.